Hey there, I'm Sarah A. Chrisman, the author of The Tales of Chetzemoka, and today I'm going to talk to you about women's exchanges in the 19th century. In The Tales of Chetzemoka, Ken and Addie's mother, Mrs. Kellum, is in charge of the local Women's Exchange, a charitable organization. I first came across a reference to women's exchanges in a Good Housekeeping article from the late 19th century. The article treated them as something that was commonly familiar to the magazine's audience, but I'd never heard of them before. Curious to learn more, I dove into further research, and what I found fascinated me. Late Victorian women's exchanges were sort of a combination work training program, craft fair, and bake sale all rolled into one. The idea was to provide a venue for poor and lower middle class women to sell goods they'd made at home, and occasionally to offer their services. There was one case where a young woman whose family had fallen on hard times went to a women's exchange hoping for suggestions as to how she might make a living. When the women on the suggestion committee asked her what skills she had, she rather forlornly told them she couldn't even sew, and her only real skill was taking care of dogs. The women of the exchange responded by setting her up with what was essentially a pet-sitting service, taking care of people's pet dogs and birds when they went on vacation. She made a rather respectable income at it. Besides this interesting case, women's exchanges did a brisk business in things like homemade pickles, needlework, and other homemade foods and crafts. Poor and lower middle-class women would bring in their goods, then the better-off women running the exchange would do the work of selling them, and then return the profits to the women who'd produced the goods. For the women running the exchange, an important part of their job was offering suggestions to the women making things for improving the sales of their products. For example, they might tell them, "Oh, you crochet beautifully, but chartreuse and purple might not be the best color combination." Or, "I loved your chili, but it would probably sell better in February than in the hottest week of August." The basic idea of a women's exchange was to combine the skills of poor and lower middle-class women with the marketing know-how and networking connections of upper-middle and upper-class women. The lower-class women had things to sell, and the better-off women had friends with money to buy them. The pet-sitting business I mentioned earlier was only possible because the women's exchange model brought together a destitute young woman who loved animals and a group of women with enough disposable income to pay her for keeping their pets while they went off on vacation. Women's exchanges were all about setting up these sorts of mutually beneficial relationships. The idea was for women to help women help themselves. The first women's exchange model was organized in Philadelphia in 1833 under the name of the Ladies' Depository Association. They sold everything from delicate needlework to fine baby clothes, embroidery, sofa cushions, decorated china, rag dolls, preserves and pickles, cakes, and even invalid foods. By 1894, there were 75 different women's exchanges across America, all modeled to one extent or another on this initial organization. Besides these long-term exchanges with their permanent headquarters that found their way into the statistics in big cities like New York, smaller-scale exchanges operating on a short-term basis pop up in the records of women's groups in much smaller communities like Creston, Iowa. In small towns, only a handful of women might be involved in the exchange, but in big cities their operations could be fairly extensive. For example, in 1893, the New York Women's Exchange helped about 2,000 women earn money from their work. Many of the women who got their start by selling items through an exchange went on to run thriving businesses, like one woman who learned baking through her local exchange and ultimately ran a business selling 100 loaves of bread every day. Another woman designed a special sort of scented pincushion which she sold through the Women's Exchange in her community. Her product was so successful she was able to patent it. Then she went on to sell and ship her pincushions all over the country. Some women's exchanges ran their own kitchens where members of the general public could come and buy their lunch. and women's exchanges had such a close association with homemade food that some of them published cookbooks of recipes supplied by their contributors. As important as foods and handcrafts were to exchanges, though, they weren't by any means the only things on offer. Women who lived in the country raised flowers for sale. Violets were especially popular, while other women made puzzles for sale or hired themselves out to read aloud to invalids at respectable wages. When all was said and done, women's exchanges were good proof that then, as now, there really was no limit to what a woman can do.
Thank you for watching today. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give it a nice thumbs up, and remember to tell your friends about my books. Happy reading!